Welcome to the I Am Capable podcast. I'm your host, Alex Gilbert, CEO, founder, and coach of Capable Consulting. I was diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD at the age of 8, and since then, I've navigated school, work, and leadership through a lens of neurodiversity, allowing me to create a set of strategies and insights to help neurodiverse professionals thrive. Tune in each episode for real-life scenarios, tools that bridge the gap between employees and employers. If you're a company leader, fostering inclusion, or a neurodiverse professional seeking support, then you are in the right place. Through this podcast, we'll grow together and explore what it means to have work be challenging and not hard. Let's break down the stigmas, boost productivity, and celebrate the strengths that help you feel empowered to say, I am capable. Welcome back to the I Am Capable podcast. I'm your host, Alex Gilbert, CEO, founder, and coach of Capable Consulting. And today we're going to be talking about accommodations. I bet, without even looking at what my questions are, Samantha has already put, what are accommodations for people at work? And the reason I say that is because it is probably the most asked question of people who are coming into the workplace, who have a learning disability, who have ADHD, maybe they were diagnosed as kids, maybe they were diagnosed as adults, and say, I have no idea where to start in terms of what accommodations look like, and am I going to tip off my employer to say, like, do they really need this? There's a whole slew of conversations we can have around accommodations, and so I'm so excited to bring on Samantha so we can actually talk about what some of those deep diving conversations look like around accommodations and what the actual accommodations can be. Welcome back, Samantha.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me back. And you are exactly right. You guessed what my first question is going to be. So let's dive into it. What are some examples of accommodations for people in the workplace?
I didn't even look at the notes, mostly because I can't read. So that was also part of it. So at least I'm on the same page as you without actually reading it. In terms of what accommodations can look like, it really depends on you, your disability. It depends on the type of work that you do and the type of environment you're actually in. So it's hard for me to say point blank, here are the exact accommodations you can use or you should use. What I would say also changes as part of this conversation is, are you working in a physical office space? Or are you working from home? So let's kind of take this a little broad and then I will narrow this in. In terms of what accommodations can look like, think about what is it that is most difficult in your job day to day. You know, I just mentioned here that I probably didn't read the notes because I can't read, but often when I talk about accommodations, I always think of what can I use on my computer to read to me. I constantly use things like Speechify that reads large documents and emails to me. You know, when you're thinking about if that is a challenge for you, can you add something like that? You know, if you are working in a place that is hybrid versus working physically in a space every single day, what does that look like in your space? If you're physically in a space every day, is there a different area that you can work in that is more accommodating to you so that you can focus? Or if you're working from home, can you focus on doing the work at home and having the days that you are in the office be solely focused on the communication that you are doing with your team members while you're in there? You really need to think through what is the part that's really holding you back from being the best version of yourself and showing up. And then we can break down what tools would help you in that scenario.
Yeah, I think that's so helpful to hear. And I kind of want to dive a little bit deeper into the AI piece of this, if we can, because just in working with you, I know that you are such a proponent of using AI for help in various things. So I think it could be really helpful to maybe share with our audience some of those AI tools that you use or that you recommend some of your clients to use, just because this is kind of this whole new world in the corporate space, right?
Yeah, I think AI is really having a moment and will be here to stay for the long term. So the question is, how do you use it to your advantage? And I think when I talk to people about AI and they sit there and they get worried, like, is that going to take over my job? And I'm like, it's not if you know how to use it, because AI is only as good as the information that you put into it. So a lot of the times when I am talking to people who have ADHD, who have learning disabilities, a lot of the bottlenecking for them is the actual processes and the follow through and the breaking down of tasks to make it easier for them. We're really great at talking it out. So I have used Google Gemini Live to be able to talk things out. I have used ChatGPT. I've used Perplexity. I've used, honestly, depending on the day, some AI tools are better than others, but it also depends on the actual task that you're doing. If you are wanting to brainstorm and you can have a conversation with AI, what you can do as you're brainstorming, whether you are physically doing it in the actual AI tool or you're using something like Zoom and recording your thoughts and putting in the transcripts, you're having it break down what are some high-level information you would take from this. What questions would you have for, next steps? Can you break down these tasks into smaller tasks? If you were to have different support levels, what would that look like? You can only have that conversation with AI to have them implement the information. They don't know that information without you. You are the creative mind in this. You are the one who's thinking about the ideas. You're the one who's bringing all of the juices right there. So how can you use the tool to your advantage to break out the parts that are really hard? A lot of the times you can also set up some prompts to maybe get you to think about something in a different way, and also set up that you have automations for you to follow up with all of the people that you're talking about. Samantha, you and I have had this conversation all the time that I'm like, okay, well, you don't have to remind me all the time. You can just set up the automation and it'll end up in my inbox. And you're like, I can? Sure can. That's what those tools are for, and we have to be able to train ourselves to use it. There's a lot of free training available on all of these individual tools, and I would say if you could take an hour, 2 hours to be able to maybe watch some YouTube videos on what those trainings look like and how you can implement it in your day-to-day, it would make a huge difference.
Definitely. So just to kind of take this conversation a little bit broader, if somebody in a workplace setting, realizes that something about that work environment isn't working for them for whatever reason, how can they kind of tell if that's something that they could adjust on their own, maybe request accommodations for, or if it more so points to a bigger equity gap in the system or in the workplace around them?
Oh my goodness. There is so much that I want to answer within that one question because it's layered in so many different questions. How would you know if it wasn't working? You know what, Samantha, I'm going to take a moment to have you re-ask that question, because I think even in the processing of that information, my ADHD took me in one direction and I was still trying to listen at the same time. So I think you're definitely going to need to re-ask that question.
Fair enough. Okay. So when somebody realizes that something about their work environment is not working for them, how can they tell if that's something that they could maybe fix on their own, or if that's maybe part of a bigger equity gap in their workplace overall?
I think I didn't even do this on purpose. Even just how I responded and how you responded to me in this case says a lot. It didn't take much for me to say, can you repeat the question? But a lot of the times when we are having conversations in person, things go by the wayside. You might have missed something that was really valuable and important in that question, and I completely missed it, and I asked you to reiterate it. But maybe if you are having those conversations and they're virtual, can you record those meetings? Can you get summaries to go back and say, what did you say? Let's make sure we're on the same page before we leave. I think that there is this idea that everyone is taking in information the same way and processing in the same way, when it couldn't be further from the truth. So I think having the ability to implement different tools that might already exist in the space is one way to do it, but also thinking through, again, what are the tools that you need to do that well, and how can you talk about it and implement it if it's not necessarily there already?
Okay, so we are now going to move into our next segment, See It Through My Eyes. So we are going to watch a video and hear from somebody who has actual lived experience with this topic. So today's question comes from Abe. So let's see what he has to say.
Hey Alex, I'm Abe from New York. I work in the film industry, and recently I've been thinking about asking for an accommodation at my work, but I'm not exactly sure where to start or who to go to. How do I specifically navigate and find support in a company that doesn't have a clear process? Thank you.
Abe, it sounds like you are in exactly the place that you need to because I'm pretty sure everyone who works in the film industry is probably neurodivergent. And the fact that there is likely, very unlikely, any policy that exists is kind of par for the course. So I'm like sitting here thinking, what are my answers for you? And the answer is you're in a place that might not have been thought about because people who are in the creative space tend to be the ones who are focused solely on the creative. I would say, again, you want to think through what is the tools and the things that you are missing. If you're talking about follow through on your day-to-day tasks, what project management systems are available to you so that everyone can keep track of the tasks that they are working on? Do you even have a project manager that is available to you to work on some of these projects so you know what needs to be edited at what time and tell you where you can find those files? You know, we talk about this and feel like these types of accommodations are so big and overwhelming and only required for people who are neurodivergent, and it's not the case. Like, even as I'm giving you the examples of what those accommodations could look like, if you think about it, if you are in the C-suite, you all have executive assistants who help track information like that help you with those accommodations to keep you accountable, to make you focused on the things that matter on your day-to-day rather than being bogged down with the things that are not less important, but really less vital for you to be a part of. So I would say think about the tools and things that you need to help keep you on track, that you need support on, and how to maybe approach the producer for that conversation or somebody who is working on each film or maybe part of your company who can really find ways to give you that support, but it might not exist. And I think you have to be kind of okay to know that you are in an environment that is likely everybody is going to need the tool that you're talking about.
So that actually leads right into my next question, which is once somebody has decided to ask for accommodations, how can they really frame that request so that it feels collaborative and like it would benefit everybody, not just that one person?
I think a lot of the times when I talk about this, I almost approach it specifically with that lens of how this could be beneficial to everybody, because I think all the things that I'm talking about are beneficial to everybody. You know, I talked about Speechify and how I think that's such a great tool to be able to read to me. You're listening to this as a podcast. You might be watching this. You might be listening on your headphones. You are absorbing information that I am sharing in your ear. Think about reading an email and having it read to you so you didn't have to necessarily follow along. Those are great tools to use. If you are using things like Grammarly that's checking your grammar on every email, then everything is going out that's professional. That's going to be useful for everybody. It's also going to remind you of the attachment you said you were going to send and maybe forgot to add to that email. If you're talking about it the way that, look how cool this tool is, this could be great, or I was talking to another team and they are using this tool, or maybe I was talking to this team about the idea of implementing this tool, I think we need to continue to make our spaces adaptable and learn and grow. And there's always going to be something new and fresh that is going to help us do our work better. And we don't even know what's available. Even in our conversation of talking about how AI can come up with all those tasks and break down the outlines or even write it out or even prompt. I don't know how many people were doing things like that 5, 6 years ago, 10 years ago. Definitely not. So how are we using this to gauge what could be beneficial to everybody and kind of look at it from that lens and even maybe show videos as to what that looks like and how it could be implemented with other people?
I love that framing of the conversation because I feel like maybe a lot of the hesitancy for somebody to ask for accommodations lies in the worry that they might sound, I don't know, needy or unprofessional in some way. So if somebody is worried that their manager might start questioning their abilities if they were to ask for an accommodation. Is there kind of a good way to address that up front when the person is opening up that conversation with their manager?
I think that fear that your boss is going to feel like you are incapable of your job now that you're asking for accommodations is real. I think I've had that fear in multiple jobs myself, thinking like, are they going to fire me because I'm needing something else or needing something different to do this job that maybe I didn't need 6 months ago when I started the job? I think we need to approach this head on. I've joked, I don't even know if I've shared this on this podcast yet or not, but I've joked that my favorite book to talk about ADHD and learning disabilities is actually a kid's book, and it's I'm Going on a Bear Hunt. And if you are familiar with this, again, I have two toddlers, so I read these books a lot. If you're familiar with the book, what they say on every page is, I can't get over it, I can't go under it, I gotta go through it. Because you can't push it away and pretend it doesn't exist. You can't push it down and pretend it doesn't exist. You have to kind of walk through this and approach it head on. You can say to your manager, I know you've been likely disappointed that I haven't gotten these things on time. I'm recognizing that this is an issue for me and that it's been a challenge for me. Here's what I've been thinking about to approach this differently. And here's some tools that I would like to implement with your support so that we can do this better, because that's what this looks like. I think you're going through it and approaching it head on tells your boss and your manager that you recognizing your shortcomings. And honestly, everyone has them. Everyone has shortcomings. Everyone has things that they need support on. No one is 100% perfect at every angle of their job. But if you are taking that responsibility to say, this part is not going as well as I had hoped, here's how I'd like to improve it, I think people are receptive to know that you're trying in a way that's productive and supportive.
So let's flip the lens here and look at this from an employer's perspective or a manager's perspective. And, there was a Deloitte study that found that companies with strong inclusion practices are actually 8 times more likely to have better business outcomes. But, as you know, a lot of companies still hesitate when it comes to flexible accommodations for their employees. So it seems like there's kind of a gap between knowing inclusion matters and actually putting it into practice, right? So why do you think that that is?
The reason there's likely that gap of knowing and not knowing, I could approach this in a whole different way, but I'm thinking about the fact that currently in the employment status of companies, there is so much turnover. There's a lot of layoffs happening. There's a lot of people that have been unemployed for a long time. That business culture is changing drastically, and the job market is really very difficult. And a lot of the times when I am having conversations about inclusivity and how to make things better, they might start with one team who was working on it and that person is no longer in the position, or they've had to shift priorities and move to another position. So it's not consistent throughout the process of what they are doing. And that makes a lot of what I'm going to say very challenging. I would say in order to think about this approach and know that it is not more expensive or more difficult to implement and actually accessible to everybody, is really thinking about this approach of from the beginning. What is part of your onboarding experience? What is part of your in your process of employing people and interviewing people to really set them up for success in terms of what is available there? I think also bringing your employees into the conversation again with these ERGs, or setting up your managers to have training where they understand what is needed from all of their employees really changes how you have these conversations. I think that if we're relying solely on one specific team to make all of these policy changes, it's really hard for that one team to really spread the wealth. And I think that you can start with that one team, but the web has to spread out between all of the different layers of your company to make the actual culture shifts in productivity.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, when an employee asks for something that is outside of the usual routine for that company, what's the best way for a manager to handle that in the moment and respond, with openness instead of defensiveness, which is usually kind of the first mode.
Yeah, I think a lot of people go into these conversations and kind of go on the defense, like, I don't know if we can do that. I have to see. I think you can, again, listen to what the employee is requesting and politely say, you know what? I don't know the answer to that question. I will get back to you, and at least continue the conversation. No conversation about accommodations is one conversation. And I think that that's also important to share because it's not a one off conversation within one job, but it's also going to be an ongoing conversation regardless of what position you are in. Your job changes, especially as we're talking about the culture of how companies are working. People are now maybe in roles or taking on responsibilities that weren't necessarily in their initial job description, and they need different layers of support based on now the new description of what they are doing. So it has to be an ongoing conversation, an ongoing check-in to say, is this working? Do you need something else? Is this the right approach? How can you let me know if it's not working or we need to make the shift? Kind of giving both people some responsibility in the outcomes of what comes next. And I think that, again, with all the culture shifts of how the job market is, your responsibility as a manager is to get the best version of your employee. So how are you showing up to this conversation, showing them that you want that and that you are in this with them as a supportive team member to them?
So let's bridge the gap now between the employee who needs or is going to request an accommodation and the manager or the team that needs to hear that request and embrace it and do what they need to do to make sure they're getting the best work out of that employee. So, to start us off here, what is a simple way that companies can really make the request process for accommodations clear and easy to follow?
I think a lot of companies have information in their employee handbook that might have information about how to give support and feedback. Some of it is like an online form, some of it has to go through your manager, some of it might have to go through HR. I think the clearer the directions are in your company handbook, the better. I think the different forms of how you can have this written, whether it be something that you record a video or you make it an actual form that you can actually write in and submit, that employee has a copy of what they've requested and things like that, really help keep a paper trail that is not lost in transition. Because a lot of the times I've had conversations with companies where they're like, yeah, our employees told this. I'm like, they told you this how? And they're like, well, we had conversations. I was like, okay, but there's no trail of it. How long have you been having the exact same conversation? If you have no paper trail of this, there's no action plan either. So I would say having some type of written form, and it could, when I say written, I mean it could actually be a form that you're submitting online, or again, making it easier where someone could record something that has audio and translated, because that's easier for them to get their thoughts out to submit in some way. If that's in your employee handbook, how to do it, I think that's a really good place to start.
How can companies actually tell if their accommodation processes are really working for people?
Are you getting a lot more emails and requests from managers and teams? I think I've said this in other episodes as well. A lot of the times people don't know what already exists in companies, maybe because the onboarding process didn't necessarily share all of the tools that already exist. I think that I wouldn't want to say you get no requests for accommodations, because I think that's not realistic. And I also think silence is also not always the best answer for that. But I think that if you're recognizing that people are showing up in a way that they feel supported, they're less burnt out, they're staying in their jobs longer, you're not firing people more often. I think those are real indicators that the accommodations that are actually being implemented are working.
And how do you keep these conversations going without them just kind of turning into a formality or, check the box once a year and never think about it again?
I think that is the hardest question to answer because so many people come into this with the best intentions of we want to do something differently. And every workshop that I've ever done in a corporate setting, I specifically end every call and every workshop with what are your next steps and what is your follow-up, because it has to be a continuous conversation. You can't just say like that was a great conversation and come to it a year later. Part of what I do in those workshops is literally a very tangible plan that you are writing out that you can go discuss with your teams, and I kind of give you framework on how you can have those discussions to make those next steps, because it's really nice to have conversations. Action plans are what's needed, and only you know how to make those action plans.
Absolutely. I think this has been an awesome conversation. I think you've provided our audience with a ton of great insight into accommodations, whether they're an employee or an employer. So I would like to shift gears and ask you a few rapid fire
Let's
questions.
do it.
All right, this first one, I think you're going to laugh because you have two young toddlers. I have two young toddlers. Walk us through your morning routine, Alex.
What morning? I truly, I have. Here's what I'm going to say. Having ADHD, I would say having something that's like a strict routine. So many people strive for that. There is not a single day that I have that looks the same. But I would say most mornings start off with my 3-year-old waking me up and say, I had a really good sleep. It's time to play. So I'd say it starts that way. It's usually rushing our 2 kids out the door so we can bring them to daycare. And then I usually try and find some kind of transition between the morning chaos and time for me before I start working. So I never really start working before like 10 a.m. because I want to have a moment to drink my coffee, maybe clean up a little bit, have a nice breakfast. So some variation of chaos with a little bit of transition time.
Well, I can relate to
Oh,
that.
yes.
All right, so leading into that, what about it's been a really long day, a lot of clients at work, the kids are crazy, dinner time, bath time, bedtime, you get them down to sleep. What is your go-to way to kind of reset after a really long day?
I would say the faster I can get into my PJs, the better. So sometimes I'm like halfway through their bedtime routine. I'm like, yeah, you know what? I want my PJs too. I usually would say crashing on the couch, like talking to my husband, like having a conversation that's like an adult conversation usually helps. Sometimes it's scrolling on social media, watching a good show. Um, it's usually some form of that. I would say pre-kids, it was probably slightly different. I probably would have gone to a yoga class or things like that after a long day, but rest is productive. So some type of rest is usually where I am.
Definitely agree. And last up, if you could swap lives with anyone for one day, who would it be?
If I could swap lives. Honestly, you're going to hate me for saying this. I would never swap lives with anybody. I love my life. I love my family. I love my kids. I love what I do every day. And what you see on social media and everything else is not real. And that to me feels so artificial. So I wouldn't want to be in somebody else's shoes in that way. But I could certainly use someone who would like to declutter my home from like top down, meal prep for me in some way, like do laundry. If I could take someone else's resources to be able to do that, that would be so helpful. But there's no one, I don't really want to switch lives with anybody. I know that sounds like such an annoying answer to say, but it's really how I feel.
I love that. I think that's amazing. And thank you so much for answering my questions.
All right. Thanks so much, Samantha. And thank you for listening. If you're a neurodiverse adult navigating challenges in your career or a company looking to become more inclusive, then visit us at capableconsulting.com. If you have questions or you'd like to submit one for a future episode, email us at podcast@capableconsulting.com. Follow us on social media at I Am Capable. And don't forget to like and subscribe and leave us a review on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite shows. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much for watching and listening to the I Am Capable podcast. My mission is to make sure that with the right strategies, neurodiverse employees and their companies are able to increase productivity, improve communication, and create an environment where everyone feels valued. Through one-on-one coaching, I help neurodiverse professionals gain clarity, build confidence, and develop personalized tools to succeed at work. For companies, Capable Consulting offers custom workshops and trainings designed to help your teams better understand and support a dynamic, neurodiverse workforce. Whether you are navigating career shifts, college transitions, or you are looking for community through the ADHD Lounge, I'm here to help. Let's build a workplace where everyone can thrive. Visit capableconsulting.com to learn more and connect with me today.